I am at the Bangkok Adventist Chinese Church. It's a beautiful setting. What I really like about this church is that suspended cross that you see there. This is a church. The New Testament word for church is Ekklesia. But those early believers did not have a beautiful building like this. I love beautiful churches. St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, even though it's a mosque now. Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And here in Thailand, there is a beautiful church in a province called Chantaburi, about 300 kilometers from here. But this church is pretty nice too, and has this unique cross behind. To 21st century people, when you say the word church, this is what we think of. A piece of architecture, a nice roof, whether it's a dome or it's a pointed one like this, a cross figure behind or at the entrance. But for the early Christians, for about 300 years, there were no church buildings. For them, church had a very different connotation. It was something more organic. And so you could be a church by a riverside, under a tree, in a lecture hall, at the marketplace. In other words, wherever a group of believers came together, you have church. And this was an amazing understanding that was all the way through every portion of the New Testament. When Jesus said church, he wasn't talking about buildings like this. When Paul wrote about the church, he was thinking more of a body like this one. So the church is kind of organic like this. I think modern churches need to recall that early Christian memory, that a church is really about a group of people coming together to worship Jesus. Yes, you could have a beautiful church, a beautiful building like this one, and it will be nice. But that doesn't really make it a church. The architecture does not make a church. The organism makes the church. And it's good for us to recognize when we are reading the letters of Paul, say particularly chapters like 1 Corinthians 12, where it's all about church. He did not know any church building. Those early Christians took about 300 years before they thought, let's make a building to worship. They accessed whatever place was available, from home to synagogue, from lecture hall to marketplace. Because for them, being the body of Christ was what mattered. That was what Ekklesia means, even though it's translated as church. Literally, the Greek means called out of. So Christians saw themselves as people who were called out of something. They were the Ekklesia, that gathering of believers, that gathering of faith, whenever it happens. And church was not just something that happens on Sabbath or Sunday. With church buildings like this, even this one, largely operational 1 day out of 7. I learned a little song a long time ago when I was a teenager, where this child asked his father, "Where do you think God lives?" And so he suggested one of the places to the father that God lives in a church. And then the father's response is, "I don't think God lives in the church because 6 days out of 7, it is empty." So some of you out there may not have a beautiful church building like this in which to worship, but you're still Ekklesia. You may have a beautiful building like this to worship, but when you have a body of believers, you have Ekklesia. That happens through faith, through people, not through buildings. A church is not about 4 walls and a roof. Any building is 4 walls and a roof. A church is not about architecture or how beautiful it is. This church is pretty sophisticated in terms of 21st century technology, but that does not make it a church. What makes it a church is that there's a group of people who are here every Sabbath. They're here to worship God. They share a similar faith, and they are a body of Christ regardless of the building. This building is relatively new, only a few years old. And so this church has existed much longer than that without actually having their own church building. So Ekklesia, in New Testament terms, is that group of believers coming together to worship God, whether it is on Wednesday or a Thursday, Sabbath or a Sunday. Anytime Any place makes up Ekklesia because there is life there. I don't know what your experience may be today, but I hope that you will find your own version of Ekklesia. You may not have a church building where you are, but you can still be a part of the group of believers. And if you are fortunate to be in a beautiful church like this, that's great. It's really nice. But I hope that you will still enjoy the spirit of church, the true Ekklesia, regardless of building or no building. Beautiful church building or absolutely no church building. Because the presence of Christ is not predicated upon having beautiful architecture. It's predicated upon having believers. You and I are part of that Ekklesia. God bless. Have a good week ahead. I will do this maybe once a month when I come to this church. I like this setting at the back here. And I hope that those of you who are tuning in, you will share and like, so other people will see what we are covering here today. So we are going to talk about church over the coming months, and hopefully we can learn something about it through this live series. God bless. Have a good week.